There's always one person in every family who gets chosen. Not because they volunteered, not because they're the strongest, but because they're the safest to ask. The one who won't say no loudly enough. The one who's been conditioned, quietly, over years, to believe that love means absorbing whatever everyone else doesn't want to carry. I was 31 years old before I understood that I had been that person my entire life. My name is Caleb. I'm a physical therapist working in Raleigh, North Carolina. I have a one-bedroom apartment, a dog named Biscuit, and what I used to describe as a close family. My father, Raymond, is 68. He had a hip replacement 8 months before this story begins. The surgery went fine. The recovery did not because of any medical complication, but because recovering at home requires someone at home to help you recover. My mother, Diane, had decided that her life was too full for that kind of disruption. My older brother, Marcus, who lives 40 minutes away in Cary, had decided the same. And so, by a process that was never discussed openly and never agreed to formally, it became my responsibility. I drove to their house every Tuesday and Thursday. I managed his medications, helped him with his PT exercises, drove him to follow-up appointments. I reorganized the bathroom so he wouldn't fall. I installed the grab bars myself. I bought the shower seat, the non-slip mats, the pill organizer with the days of the week printed in large font. I did all of this while working 36 hours a week and paying my own rent in a different city. No one asked me if I had the bandwidth. No one said thank you in a way that felt like they meant it. And when I mentioned, once, that the Tuesday drives were making my Wednesdays brutal, my mother said, "Well, you're the one with the flexible schedule." I didn't argue, I just absorbed it, the way I always had. My father, for his part, was not unaware of what was happening. Raymond is not a loud man. He doesn't argue, doesn't command, doesn't demand. What he does is notice. He watches. And in the months I was coming to that house, I would sometimes catch him looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully name. Part gratitude, part apology, part something older and heavier that I didn't have a word for yet. The situation I'm about to describe happened on the Sunday of Memorial Day weekend. I had worked a full week, covered a colleague's Friday shift as a favor, and driven 2 hours to my parents' house for what my mother had called a family gathering. She'd mentioned it 3 weeks earlier in a group text. She said she was cooking. She said it would be good for my father to have everyone together. She used the phrase, "We all need this." I took a half day off on Friday to make the weekend work. I brought my father his favorite, a lemon pound cake from a bakery near my apartment that I knew he loved and that no one else ever thought to bring him. I arrived at 4 in the afternoon. The driveway held only my father's car, which he wasn't supposed to be driving yet. I knocked. No answer. I used my key. The house was quiet in the particular way. Houses are quiet when something is wrong. Not peaceful quiet. Absence quiet. My father was in his recliner in the living room, still in his pajamas at 4 in the afternoon. There was a glass of water on the side table, mostly empty. There was no food visible. The kitchen looked like no one had been in it for hours. He was awake. He looked up when I came in, and I saw it immediately. Not surprised at seeing me, but something closer to relief. Like he'd been waiting and had started to wonder if waiting was going to be enough. "Hey, Dad." I kept my voice even. "Where is everyone?" He looked down at his hands for a moment. Then he reached over to the side table and handed me a piece of paper. A note, handwritten by my mother. It said that she and Marcus and his family had gone to Marcus's in-laws' lake house for the long weekend. She wrote that the food was in the fridge, that she'd left his afternoon medications on the counter, and that she knew I was coming, so she hadn't worried. She knew I was coming, so she hadn't worried. I stood in the kitchen holding that note for longer than I'd like to admit. I was doing the math of it. My father had been alone since at least the night before, possibly longer. He couldn't drive. He couldn't safely navigate the stairs to the second floor without assistance on a bad hip day, and I could see from the way he was sitting that it was a bad hip day. The medications were on the counter, meaning he hadn't been able to reach them without walking farther than he should have been walking. He had not eaten a real meal, and my mother had known all of this and left anyway because she knew I was coming. I set the note down very carefully on the counter. I didn't crumple it. I didn't throw it. I kept it because some part of me already understood that I was going to need it. I went back to the living room. I helped my father to the bathroom. I reheated some of the soup that was in the fridge. I sat with him while he ate, and for a while neither of us said anything. Because there are conversations that need food and warmth in the room before they can happen, and we were still building those conditions. He finished about half the soup. He set the spoon down and looked at me and said, "I'm sorry about this, Caleb. You don't have anything to be sorry for. I should have called you when they left last night." Last night, I said it flat, not as a question. Around 8, your mother said you'd be here by noon today. He paused. I didn't want to bother you. He had been alone for nearly 20 hours. With a hip he couldn't fully trust, in a house he could barely navigate safely, with medications he'd had to hobble across the kitchen to retrieve, and he didn't want to bother me. I helped him back to his recliner. I got him a fresh glass of water. I gave him his evening medication. And then I sat across from him and I asked quietly how long this had been the pattern. He was quiet for a moment, not reluctant, more like he was deciding how honest to be, and landing on fully. He told me that since the surgery, my mother had been present for about 30% of his care needs on the days I wasn't there. That on several occasions she had left him alone in the mornings to go to her book club or her lunch plans, and he had managed, but managing had meant not eating when he should have, not taking medications on the right schedule, and once, about 6 weeks prior, falling in the hallway and lying on the floor for 40 minutes before she returned. He hadn't told anyone about the fall. He said he didn't want to cause drama. He had been lying on the floor of his own home for 40 minutes, and he hadn't told anyone because he didn't want to cause drama. I asked him why he'd never said anything to me directly. He looked at me with that expression again, the one I hadn't had a word for. And he said, "Because I could see what it was already costing you, and I didn't want to ask you to pay more." That was the moment the thing I'd been carrying shifted from obligation to something with more weight and sharper edges. I had come every Tuesday and Thursday. I had bought the grab bars and the shower seat and driven 4 hours round trip twice a week, and never once heard from my father that he wished someone would step up besides me, because he was too busy protecting me from the full picture. He had been my parent in the only way he still could be, by trying to limit my burden. I told him I needed to make a phone call. I stepped outside onto the back porch. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, which told me the phone was nearby, which told me she was not unreachable. "Oh, Caleb, you made it. How's Dad doing?" I didn't answer the question directly. I told her I was at the house. I told her I was aware she had left the previous evening. I told her that Dad had been alone since 8 p.m. the night before, and that I needed to understand, clearly, what the arrangement was going forward. There was a pause. Then she said, in a tone I had heard my entire life, the tone she used when she was about to reframe something in a way that made me the unreasonable one, "You know your schedule is more flexible than Marcus's. Marcus has the kids. He has his in-laws this weekend. I didn't think it was a big deal since you were coming anyway." I asked her what would have happened if I hadn't been coming. She said, "But you were coming." I asked her what would have happened if I had gotten into a car accident on the way, if I had gotten sick, if literally anything had interrupted my ability to arrive. She said, "Caleb, you're being dramatic." I want to describe exactly how that sentence landed, because I think it matters. I had driven 8 months of Tuesdays and Thursdays. I had installed hardware in their bathroom. I had reorganized their medication system. I had taken time off work, rearranged my schedule, and driven across the state on a holiday weekend. And I was being dramatic because I was asking what the contingency plan was if I couldn't make it. I told her I loved her. I told her I loved Dad. I told her I would talk to her when she returned. And then I hung up, and I stood on that back porch for a long time looking at their yard, and I made a decision. I was not going to absorb this anymore. I went back inside. I asked my father, calmly and directly, if he would be willing to let me help him in a different way going forward. Not just showing up, but actually documenting what was happening. The fall in the hallway, the missed medications, the morning absences. He looked at me for a moment, and then he nodded. Over the next 2 days, I stayed the entire weekend because of course I stayed. He and I talked more honestly than we had in years. He told me things he had been holding for a long time, that he'd been aware for a while that the care arrangement was mostly me. that he had tried to bring it up with my mother and been told that I didn't mind and that I was built for this kind of thing. He had tried once to bring it up with Marcus, who had said, "Well, you know how Caleb is. He likes to be helpful," as though my willingness to help was a personality quirk that exempted everyone else from responsibility. I documented everything I could. I wrote down the timeline of the weekend. I photographed the note my mother had left on the counter. My father described the fall from 6 weeks ago, and I wrote that down too, with the date he remembered and the duration. I was a physical therapist. I understood documentation. I understood what a pattern of inadequate supervision looked like in a clinical chart, and I understood what it looked like outside one, too. I called the area agency on aging for our county. I did it not as a threat, but because I needed to understand what formal support options existed. The woman I spoke to was patient and thorough. She told me about in-home care assessment programs, about caregiver support services, about what circumstances would warrant a welfare check or a formal report. She also told me something I had not known, that family members could request a care needs assessment for an elderly relative, independent of what other family members wanted. That my father could have a say in his own care arrangement. That he didn't have to depend on whoever showed up. I wrote that down too. My mother and Marcus returned Monday evening. I was still there. I think they expected me to be gone. My mother walked in and said, "Oh," in a tone that was surprise and something else. Something like the recognition that whatever she had left behind was not what she was coming home to. I asked them both to sit down. I was not loud. I've thought about this a lot since, because I think there is an instinct, when you have been swallowing something for a long time, to finally expel it with as much force as it took to keep it down. I didn't do that. I kept my voice at the temperature of a professional conversation, because I have learned that calm makes it harder for people to dismiss you as emotional, and I was not going to give either of them that exit. I told them what I had documented, the timeline of the weekend, the note, the fall in the hallway that no one had mentioned, the pattern of my mother's absences on my off days. I told them I had contacted the area agency on aging. I told them that my father's current care arrangement was not adequate and that it was going to change. Marcus started to say something about his schedule. I told him I wasn't asking about his schedule. I was informing him of what was going to happen next. My mother said I was making this into something bigger than it was. I told her I disagreed and that my disagreement was now in writing. I told them I was going to work with the agency to get a formal in-home care assessment done within the next 2 weeks. I told them that going forward, the days I was not there would need to be covered, either by family or by a paid caregiver whose costs would come from the household, not from me. I told them that I would continue to be involved in my father's care because I wanted to be, not because I was the default option, and that the distinction mattered. My father said nothing during this conversation. He didn't need to. He had said what he needed to say to me over the weekend, in the quiet of his own kitchen, with the honesty of a man who had been trying to protect me from a truth I was finally ready to hear. After my mother and Marcus had retreated to other rooms, not stormed out, not yelled, but retreated, which felt in some ways more significant, my father called me over to his recliner. He looked tired in the way people look tired after something has finally been said. He held out his hand and I took it. "You didn't have to do all of this," he said. "I know." I meant it both ways. I knew it wasn't my sole obligation. I also knew I was choosing to do it anyway. I should have said something sooner. "You protected me for as long as you could," I said. "That was your job. This is mine now." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. 2 weeks later, the in-home assessment was completed. The assessor noted concerns about supervision consistency and recommended 12 hours per week of in-home aid support. The family, meaning my mother, meaning Marcus, was formally informed of the recommendation and the process for implementing it. My mother initially pushed back. Marcus initially said they'd figure it out among themselves. I had both of these responses documented, along with the date and the nature of the pushback, and I forwarded the documentation to the agency coordinator as a follow-up. They stopped pushing back. The aide started the following month. Her name is Patrice. She is experienced, warm, and she makes my father laugh, which is something I had not heard enough of in that house for a long time. He is doing his exercises consistently now. His hip has improved more in the 3 months since Patrice started than it did in the 6 months before, because consistent support is what recovery actually requires. I still drive out on Tuesdays, but now is because I want to have dinner with my father and watch whatever game is on, not because I'm the only thing standing between him and an empty house. My mother and I have had several conversations since the Memorial Day weekend. They have not been easy. She has, at various points, characterized my actions as an overreaction, as a betrayal, and once, memorably, as something she would have expected from someone less empathetic. I have listened to all of it. I have not absorbed it. There is a version of this story where I stayed quiet, where I kept driving Tuesdays and Thursdays and adding Saturdays when they were needed and telling myself it was fine. I was built for this. I didn't mind. Where my father's fall in the hallway became the first of several, and where one of those falls happened when I wasn't there, and where the outcome of that fall became something we all had to carry for the rest of our lives. I don't live in that version anymore. What I know now, at 31, is that the willingness to help is not the same as the obligation to do everything. That being the closest, the softest, the most available is not a job description. That when a family assigns care to whoever objects least, they are not making a thoughtful decision. They are making a convenient one. And convenience has a cost. It just gets billed to someone who never agreed to the contract. My father deserved better than what he was getting. So for that matter, did I. That note my mother left on the counter, I still have it. Not as evidence, not anymore. I kept it because it says something true about how I used to be seen in that family. And I keep it where I can see it sometimes, not to stay angry, but to remember the distance I've traveled from the person who would have read that note and just started reheating the soup without saying a word. I still reheated the soup. That part I don't regret. Everything after that, I did differently. If you are the person in your family who always gets called, who always figures it out, who everyone assumes will be fine because you always have been, I want you to hear this. Being capable is not the same as being available. Being willing is not the same as being responsible for everything. You are allowed to love someone and still require that love to be shared across more than one set of hands. The people you love deserve real care. So do you. And those two things are not in conflict, unless someone has spent years trying to convince you that they are.